As of now, we have seen various important causes behind the outbreak of the Second World War. In this lesson, we would be continuing that by looking at another important cause, the rise of totalitarian ideologies and how that was a cause behind the outbreak of the Second World War. In the period before the Second World War, in the interwar period, there was a rapid rise of totalitarian ideologies all across Europe. But before we understand how that happened, let's first understand what a totalitarian ideology is. Totalitarian ideologies or totalitarianism itself is an ideology where all the power, political, economic, all forms of power is centralized in the hands of one person who happens to be an authoritarian leader, and it's in his hands where all the power is concentrated and everyone else is bound to obey this particular leader. Now, a state which keeps this system, totalitarianism, at its center is in turn known as a totalitarian state. And these states are centered, as I mentioned, around one person, the leader itself. So it were these ideologies that was having a rapid rise in the interwar period. All across Europe, these ideologies were rising, particularly in Italy, Germany, Spain, and Portugal. Of these, the most popular totalitarian ideologies were Nazism, which rose up in Germany under Hitler, and fascism, which rose up under Mussolini in Italy. Now let us quickly look as to what caused the rise of these ideologies in Europe at this particular point of time. The interwar period saw a transition of power equation in Europe. The previous monarchies, which were centuries old, now were replaced by newly elected democratic governments which stood for the hopes of the people. So we see in this map that the old and archaic European empires, namely the German Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, declined and decayed and eventually split up and formed newly independent democratic countries. As we see over here, we can see Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Romania. All these were formed out of these erstwhile empires. And these new nations had democratic governments, which stood for the hopes of the people. This introduction of democracy in these new nations was considered to be a grand experiment, as these nations had never been exposed to democracy. As mentioned, democracy was a grand experiment for these nations, and the people had put all their faith in these new governments, as they were now fatigued by war and had suffered enough losses in the First World War. All they wanted was peace, prosperity, and development, which they believed these new governments could bring them. Do you think these governments were able to do that? Unfortunately, most of these new democracies were inefficient, corrupt, and weak. In fact, these democratic governments could not even meet up to the basic of civilians' aspirations, such as stable employment, political continuity, and likewise. And in fact, since these governments are so corrupt and weak, these governments also could not handle or tackle the economic crisis that took place in interwar Europe. In this particular picture, you can see a glimpse of the unemployment crisis in interwar Europe, where the people are hanging these placards around their shoulders as if they are wares, and they're trying to sell themselves to whatever possible source that there could be so that they can get a decent and stable job, and they were ready to do anything which can get them money. So you can understand that this was the condition of unemployment, and just like that, there were many other economic crises that was taking place in interwar Europe, even under these democratic governments' rule. It is the people of these nations who had once put their faiths and hopes into these governments, now seeing that their aspirations are not being met, and in fact their countries are actually declining in prosperity, started to lose their faith in these new governments. This loss of faith in these governments caused frustration and aggression in the public. They started protesting against the government. As you can see over here, the German public are protesting against the Weimar Republic, which was the government during interwar Germany. And we see that these people who are frustrated and now aggressive, they started to look for alternatives which would also be more violent and more aggressive, but would get them exactly what they deserve and what they want. Therefore, we see that the rising frustration in the public turned the people towards more violent and aggressive political ideologies. And these, of course, were the totalitarian ideologies, as I mentioned. The rising dictators and tyrants of this time who wanted to rise up to power decided to cash in on this opportunity. They decided to use the frustration in the people's heart for their own benefit. You see, they felt that if they could give voice to the frustration of the public and could appease to the public, they would be able to convince them that it is not democracy, but it is totalitarianism that is a true answer, a true solution to their miseries. They were wrong. They wanted the public to think that they were wrong at first, to think that democracy could solve their problems. It's only totalitarianism which is a true answer to all their problems. And therefore we see people were turning towards totalitarian ideologies. In this picture you see the German public are showing their support and admiration for the Nazi ideology by doing the patent Nazi salute. Therefore, this is how Nazism managed to rise up in Germany, of course under the behest of Adolf Hitler on the left, and at the same time, fascism rose up in Italy under Benito Mussolini on the right. To know more in detail about the rise of these totalitarian leaders and their ideologies in their respective countries, you can click on the link below to access the iDictionary feature. Can you answer this question? Who introduced Nazism in Germany? Was it Mussolini? Was it Hitler? Was it Churchill? Or was it Stalin? The correct answer happens to be Hitler. But now that we understood that the totalitarian ideologies were rising up in Europe at this point of time, and Nazism and fascism were the primary ideologies of this kind, we still need to understand how did the rise of Nazism and fascism cause another world war? What really led these ideologies to cause another world war? Before that, I have to ask you a question. What will happen if you're left alone in your house? Your parents are not there to scold you or to supervise over you. There is no restriction on how much TV you can watch, and also no limit to how much ice cream you can consume. Be honest to yourself. Would you not be having an unholy amount of ice cream and watch an unhealthy amount of television? Why does this happen? This is because in the absence of a check over power, people usually make erratic and fickle-minded decisions. This, when seen politically, could also mean declaring war without a second's thought. These totalitarian ideologies had a similar situation. The leaders had no check over them, and therefore they made fickle-minded decisions like that. This often threatened other European nations. These two ideologies, when they came to power in their respective countries, Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy, actually had initial success through their policies. And that initial success was enough to provide impetus or to give inspiration to already discontented countries across Europe, who now felt that the only path they should follow is that of totalitarianism, as it would provide them prosperity and success. And therefore we understand that totalitarianism and extremism were actually spreading all across Europe like a virus at this point of time. Both Hitler and Mussolini had very strict post-war recovery programs for their nations, and these programs and policies had an influence of aggressive nationalism. In fact, whatever policies these leaders came up with were aggressive in nature, be it their domestic policies or be it their foreign policies, which were more focused on expansionism rather than keeping a good relation with other nations. Therefore, we see that totalitarian leaders put forward aggressive foreign policies and expansionist tendencies. And these aggressive policies and expansionist tendencies were not taken well by other nations, who felt threatened by these tendencies and policies, as they felt that they might as well become the target of these expansions and these aggressions. The other nations also realized that the totalitarian leaders could take quick decisions, even that of declaring war. And this is because they have complete political authority, and there is no opposition to block their decisions. And therefore, the other nations were also threatened by this because they could not come up with a decision as quickly as these leaders could, and they felt that a war might be declared on them in seconds' notice and they would not have time to act back. So, you see, the very existence of these totalitarian ideologies and these totalitarian states disrupted the political equation of Europe, and that was enough to create international tension, which eventually led to a Second World War. In this lesson, we focused upon the rise of totalitarian ideologies in Europe in this particular period of time and how that was instrumental in causing the outbreak of the Second World War. But that was not the final cause behind the Second World War. In the subsequent lessons, we would be looking at the various other causes which led to the ultimate outbreak of the Second World War. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.